So we're here at the Maxon booth, makers of Cinema 4D, and for all of you who don't know, Redshift has joined the Maxon family, so one big happy family now. We also are giving away over $25,000 of prizes at C4D Live. So if you haven't gone yet, this is like your last chance to register for your chance to win. Also, in other great news, we were nominated for Product of the Year here at NAB, as well as we got an Oscar for MoGraph this year. So it's been a real big year, huge year for community, and I have to say the energy over here and everybody in attendance, it's been really amazing. So just to my left is a gentleman that we started off pretty similar. I think you're one of the first artists I recruited years ago when I first got started. So one of the longtime friends, as well as an amazing instructor, educator, and artist, and all-around maker of cute things, EJ Haagen-Dazs? Haagen-Dazs?
Yeah. Hats and pants.
Hats and pants.
Hats and pants. Got the Rocky Road flavor coming out next week, yeah. Thanks for everyone coming out. Thanks for Maxon for inviting me out again. It's such an honor to be here. And hello to everyone on the internet. I am EJ Hassenfratz. I run a blog, iDesign.com. I have over 150 tutorials on it. Been teaching Cinema 4D for about 5 years now. Been using it for about 10. And one of the main reasons why I kind of fell in love with Cinema 4D and why I'm so passionate about teaching it and introducing so many people that are completely new to 3D to Cinema 4D is that I truly believe it is the easiest and fastest way to learn 3D. If it wasn't for Cinema 4D, I don't even know if I'd be doing 3D at this point just because I'm not a technical person. So Cinema 4D allows artists to be artists and just allow them to create. And one thing I'm super excited about is the new version, R20. Who's on R20? Got a couple people here. Awesome. So two of the big new features to Cinema 4D R20 are fields and volumes. So today what I'm going to be primarily going over is some creative ways to use fields and volumes and kind of rethink how you've done old projects and think about like, oh, I could have done this way faster. So some of the things in here are going to be like rehashing some of my old tutorials and just kind of showing how you can do this and how you can do those kind of complex things in a much easier way. How many people have actually watched any of my tutorials before? I'm so sorry. Yeah, we got a few people here. I'm so sorry. Let's just dive into it. So what we're going to do first is, for those of you who aren't familiar with fields, just kind of break down what fields are and how they work. You can see in this little example here is that basically how you think of fields now versus the old falloff system is think of fields as black and white matte layers. So you can see how we have this kind of setup here where we have black and white cubes, and whatever's white is going to be fully affected by an effector, and whatever's black is not going to get any effect of the effector whatsoever, okay? So let's just hop over into a little scene here. And basically I just have a bunch of panels here. If I go ahead and rotate this, you can see, let me do this, that they just kind of flip over, reveal the red side. So if I want to control that via an effector, I'm just going to go ahead. Is this? Yeah, R20. All right. So what I'm going to do is just go in here and just go and add a plane effector. And that just edits plain old PSR, position, scale, and rotation. I'm just going to uncheck the position, and what I'm going to do is go ahead and just rotate this 180 degrees in the rotations pitch, okay? So now what I'm going to do, and that just totally rotates all of my clones, but if I want to control and have control over what clones are being affected, that's where we go into our falloff tab and add a field. So here's my linear field. And this is just like super basic stuff, like we all know how this works, right? Now, one thing that's new as far as like if you wanted a linear field or a linear fall off to pass through, but you wanted to randomize it a little bit, make it look a little bit more of an interesting animation instead of having this just look so straight ahead linear, is you would go ahead and add random weights and all this kind of stuff, which is quite a few steps just to kind of randomize what's going on here. One of the things I really love about the new field system is that if you want to randomize how this linear field is kind of affecting these clones as this is passing through, all you need to do is go into our field menu, okay, and just go into a random field, or you can get a shader field, but I'm just going to go into the random field here. And another thing I really love about the random field is that we now have access. If you go to random mode, you can go to noise, and we have access to all of the noise shaders inside of Cinema 4D versus the old kind of random effector, which you were limited to the amount of noise you could do. You can add. So now that you have your random field in here, we have all these blending modes. So this is exactly like Photoshop or After Effects. And again, if you think of, you can see, here's my little noise represented in this little box here, preview box. Think of that as a black and white noise layer that we can then use blending modes to have it interact with this like black and white layer underneath it, this linear field. So what I'm going to do to kind of blend this is just use the overlay mode, okay? And now you can see we have this kind of randomization as far as the values that are represented on this linear field. It's no longer super linear. We have some varying values here. Now to show like what's going on behind the scenes here, I'm just going to show this using just simple black and white. So here's my linear field. You can see here's the end of the field. Here's the start of it. Everything to the left here, everything in black, is not being affected by the plane effector at all. The plane effector is just simply moving everything up, okay? And if I go ahead, and you can see this gradient ramp from black to white, if I go and just add a random field, you can see that's randomizing all those grayscale values. And if I go and just hit overlay, now you can see what's going on there. We're getting, if I just turn on this, you can see these little color wheels. If I turn that on, you can see that it's actually represented as colors, you know? So now you can see exactly what's going on behind the scenes. And I think just realizing that that's what's going on with all these blending modes really kind of unlocked my understanding of how fields work. So super basic stuff on fields. Let's go and dive a little bit deeper into more complex things. So one of the things I've always tried to do in Cinema 4D was, how do I use MoGraph to actually trigger an animation of a clone? And this is something I've done a tutorial before on it, but it wasn't really like triggering animation. It was kind of like a hacky way to do this kind of thing. So what I'm going to do is show you how to actually trigger like a cloth animation. That playback's going all wonky. But let's go and let me just open up this file right here. All right, so I just cloned some cloth pieces. Actually, I have a tutorial just on like how to get this kind of cloth simulation. But basically, all I did was bake out this cloth simulation. And now what I want to do, I'm cloning it in a grid, and I want to trigger that cloth simulation. So it inflates when an effector passes through it, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is, you can see if I just hit play, it's just going to play that cloner's animation, all right? And if I go into my timeline, you can see that that baked cloth PLA is 90 frames long, so that's important. I'm going to go into the cloner and go to the transform, and you can see that why our cloner animation is just playing from frame 0 is because we have the animation mode set to play. If I change this to fixed, you're going to see that if I hit play, nothing happens at all, okay? It's actually waiting for some other object to kind of trigger or offset that animation. And what we're going to use to trigger or offset the animation of that animation track is a plane effector. So I'm just going to go and grab my plane effector here and just drag it out from underneath the cloner. And in your plane effector, we have this time offset. So you can actually use plane effectors and other effectors to actually offset the animation of a clone. So remember, I showed you in the timeline, this is important, how long your animation is. It's got to be keyframed animation. So that's why I baked out the cloth. If it was just a cloth simulation, it would not be recognized by MoGraph. So that's why I baked it out, but it's 90 frames long. And if I just go and type in 90 frames in that plane effector, you can see, let me just turn off this position track there. But you can see now, basically what's going on is everything just is offset to that 90th frame, so it's at the end of that cloth simulation. So let's just go ahead and let's just grab a spherical field here, okay? So now what's going to happen, let me just make the spherical field a lot bigger. What's going to happen is I'm going to pass this through, and when this effectors going through, it's time offsetting the animation of each of those individual clones. But this is not, that's kind of like how I did it before, and we were limited by that simple fact that like, this is limited to how fast I'm moving this through, and at the end of the day, I'm like kind of faking it, and it's really not all that, it's really not all that easy, or you're really not achieving the animation you want. So one thing that's really awesome with the new field systems, we have a bunch of new objects and things we can use to add on to any kind of influence of an effector, okay? So one of those things is called a decay layer, okay? So decay layers are really, really cool in that if I just go back and hit play and I pass this through, you can see that it's kind of like staying. The influence of my effector is kind of staying and then going back. So we're getting 100% influence of the spherical field, and then it's going back to 0. So what the decay effector, or what the decay layer does is, if I bring up this effect strength to say 100%, is I can grab the spherical field here. Let me move this over here. Go back to frame 0, hit play. As I pass this spherical field through, notice how the strength of that plane effector actually sticks with that clone, which is something you weren't able to do before, okay? So if I crank up the inner offset of this spherical field, what we essentially have now is just popping on the effect from frame 0 to that frame 90, or 0% of that plane effector influence, or 100% of that plane effector influence. So right now that we just have things popping on, okay? So we're not really triggering anything. I mean, we're triggering it from 0 to frame 90, but how do we fill in that gap? How do we smooth that out? Well, one thing we can do to smooth that out, to actually get our animation back and have it look like we're playing it back at real time, is to add, is to go ahead and add a delay effector, or a delay layer. So this is very similar to the delay effector that you can find up here, in that we have these different modes. We can smooth out animation, we can add springy animation, but one thing I'm going to do is smooth this on out. So I'm going to smooth the interpolation of that 0 to 90. Instead of it being such a quick snap, we can actually smooth out that whole time offset that's coming from our plane effector. So now watch as I pop this through. Whoop. I'm basically triggering the animation of those clones, which is super cool. Now, one thing you have to do is, it's always good to kind of make a copy of your cloth or whatever your object is that you're going to use. Whoops. Let me grab this right there and just move this off to the side, because it's all dependent on, I think I got an extra spherical field in there. It's all dependent on the speed or the strength of your delay effector here, this effect strength. So you can see if you crank this up too high, like 99, 100 just totally throws everything out of whack for some reason. But if you do 99, let's go back to frame 0, let's hit play, and let me actually just position this over a clone and just go back, and we can compare the speed of this to the actual cloth. So you can see that this is way too slow. Okay, so that strength value on the plane, on that delay, is too strong. Let's do maybe 91% and kind of compare that. You can see that now, we're kind of getting that same speed. So we're getting close. This is like the closest you can get to like triggering the animation of your clones, which I find is really, really cool, because this is like a cloth simulation that you now can control with MoGraph. So really, really cool stuff, all using decay and delay. Decay modifier layers are so extremely powerful, as well as delay. One other thing that's really awesome is, let me see if I can show this with this. Yeah, let me show it with this. Is you can actually trigger animation a different way. So instead of using a decay, I'm going to delete that. One other super, extremely powerful thing that I think you've seen a few other presenters demo is this freeze layer. Okay, I'm just going to move this below. Let me just turn off the delay here for a second. And let's just change this mode to grow. So what a freeze layer can do is if you're affecting a single clone, like if I just position, let me just position this over this top right clone here and hit play, you're going to see nothing happens. Let me delete this extra cloth here. Because what a freeze layer does when you first apply it is it stores all the information currently. So I had that clone already activated. It stores that state in this field layer list. So what I'm going to do is just clear that out. And you can see that totally wiped out the stored information there. And now I'm going to hit play. And what we can do is set this to grow. And if I increase the radius of this growth and set this blending mode to max, because right now it's not adding to my spherical field, you can see I just popped on all of my animation. So that's way too fast. So what we can do to not have that pop so quickly is to adjust this effect strength. And that's basically how much of that spherical field we're actually applying per frame. So that's what the freeze layer does, is it takes information from this frame, and if I go one frame ahead, it takes the information and grows it out each frame. Okay? So that's based on this radius. If that's growing too fast, I can go ahead and that's too, so this is too small of a radius because my cloth pieces are about, I think it's like 200 by 200, so that's something to note about the growth. It needs to be a high enough radius to actually jump to the next clone and affect the next clone. So that's why I need to go about 425, and now you can see that now it's kind of growing like that. And again, everything's happening a little too fast, so that's why we add the delay, the delay effector, and you can see that this is going way too slow, so we're just gonna bring this down a little bit. And now with no keyframes whatsoever, I can actually trigger that animation using this freeze layer set to grow mode. Now, one thing I'm going to do is take this a whole nother level. And let me go and jump into my keynote here. And what I'm going to show you now is how you can actually use fields and that freeze layer growth to trigger this kind of dynamic cloth simulation. But this is all controlled via fields. Okay, so let's just jump back into C4D, and let's grab our morph. Octane, nope, that's fine. So basically what I have here, and I have a tutorial on my website, how to do all this, how to get this really cool cloth inflation kind of simulation going on. Again, it's on my website, iDesign.com. But I'm not going to cover that. What I am going to cover is, say you wanted to have this cloth inflation, right? And you wanted full control over how that cloth is being applied to, in our case, this letter X, okay? So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to let this simulation kind of do its thing and get to a point where I'm really digging what that final cloth look is looking like. And I'm just going to command, click, and drag to duplicate it. And I'm just going to go and let's get out of point mode here. And I just want to save that state. I want to save this cloth simulation exactly how it is. So what I'm going to do is just delete that cloth tag. And what this is going to do, I'm just going to rename this to inflated state. And then I'm just going to go back to frame 0. And let's just hide this real quick. And this is going to be like our starting point. So I'm just going to delete the cloth tag on this as well. And let me just rename this just flat. You know, it's not inflated yet. So what I want to do now is go from this flat state to the inflated state via falloffs and fields. So what I'm going to do is on this initial state, I'm going to go and I'm going to right click and go to character tags, pose morph. Who's used pose morph tag before? If you haven't, it's one of the most powerful things you can use for animation in Cinema 4D. There's tons of tutorials on like Cineversity and stuff like that, but Google it, find out, discover all the things that pose morph can do. But on a base level, what it does, it can store different types of information. So you can see on our pose morph tag here, we can store position, scale, rotation, points, parameters, user data, all this kind of stuff, vertex maps. And we can store it and then add other poses and then morph between those different poses that we're storing. So in our case, I want to store the point information on my flat X here. So I'm just going to check on points, and that's going to dump us into the tag tab, and we're going to have a base pose and then this new pose that's just by default there. And I'm just going to double click this and rename this inflated. And now what we can do, if we twirl down the advanced tab here, we can see we can actually morph to a target, okay? So since our duplicated inflated state is basically the same polygon count and everything, it's the same object, just those points are deformed, I'm going to drag and drop that inflated state into this target on this inflated pose here. And now if I go to this pose and adjust the strength here, you can see we're effectively, like, we could keyframe this strength. If we go to the animation tab, we can keyframe this strength. We can go above 100%, like, whoa, and really get some cool stuff here. But the problem is, how do we control this using fields? Well, there's a little known thing that I don't see a lot of people using, but it's called a morph deformer. And you'll find it right in the deformers menu here. And I'm just going to make sure I actually have my pose morph selected here that I want to use. And I'm going to go to deformers, and I'm going to go to morph, okay? And this is like a deformer like anything else, so it needs to be a child of whatever object has that pose morph on it. And basically what this allows us to do, there's our pose morph, and if we adjust this inflated strength, that pose, we can see we have that same functionality, but with the morph deformer, we can use fields. And so we can go ahead and we can use a linear field and then control the strength of this pose using this field. So we can go and animate this linear field, and let's actually reverse this like so. And so now as I kind of animate this across, we're actually inflating this, which is pretty cool. All right, so I can go and let's just set a keyframe to the linear field in the X, make this go about 60 frames, move this here, and let me just go ahead and delete this wind. We don't need that wind there. We don't need these lights. And then we have this kind of animation here. Let's actually speed that up like so. Let's see. So this is kind of, whatever. That's okay, but we can really improve on this. We can go into our fields here in our morph deformer, and let's go ahead and let's add a delay, and let's set this to spring. Let's add some springy movement, because remember, basically we're just like moving points and pushing points around. So we can get a little bit of springiness. Let's go in, let's add, let's change the morph strength, and let's take this inflated to like 250. So it's actually going to be like animating to this now. And let's go and add a jiggle deformer now. So let's go to our deformers, let's add jiggle, and let's make this a child of the flat inflated object. And now let's hit play. So now we get this really cool like cloth inflation kind of thing going on, which is looking really awesome. We got a lot of springy movement here. We can adjust like the stiffness settings here. One thing that's super important is the structural. Our structural is basically the springs that are connecting each vertices. If we didn't have structural percentage up, it's going to be more of like a cohesive kind of thing. We're not going to get all the wrinkles. See how we have way less wrinkles there? If we up that structural, we got a lot more stuff going on here. Get all these really nice wrinkles. See that? So one cool thing, and Lorcan actually just showed this before my presentation, but it's super cool. So usually if you use a smooth deformer, I'm just going to add this right after the jiggle. Basically, it just smooths everything out, right? And we can adjust the stiffness here. So, maybe we want to smooth this out a little bit so we got some really nice wrinkles going on. But what I also like to do is duplicate this, add another smoothing tag, and instead of smooth, I'm going to use relax. And this is perfect for like getting clothy stuff. I'm just going to hit the initialize, and we can just really crank this up. And you can see that now, actually, let's bring the stiffness down. Let's crank that up. Get the iterations here. And now we have smoothing, and then we have this relax, which also adds a lot more like really nice rippling and little creases and stuff like that. So we can then use this, instead of like a linear field, we can use a, actually let me get that back, undo. We can actually just change this type of field by just going to the field tab and going to spherical, okay? And now we can just, let me just delete the keyframes on this and get some inner fall off there. And now I can go and just kind of bring this through, inflate this up, have full control over this inflation, which is super cool. And again, remember, as I'm passing this spherical field through, as it passes through, it's going to go back to its original pose, or that flat pose. So if I want it to remain that strength, I'm going to go to my morph, go to my fall off, and remember the decay can allow us to keep that strength as that field passes through it and brings it from 0% influence to 100, and it will stay at 100 if we have this decay set to 100%, okay? So now as I pass the spherical field through, we can have this inflate, and as this is affecting all those points, that morph deformer is doing its thing, I can inflate this, kind of paint on almost the influence of that inflation, and that'll then stay, okay? So you can really play around with the jiggle deformer, because the jiggle deformer is the thing that's kind of key in that it's going to allow for that inflation and then that springiness to have it look like it's cloth billowing. And you would think that that's a cloth simulation, but that's entirely done using field. So a lot of power with like almost painting on influences of how a cloth or even soft bodies can affect objects. And if you wanted to, you could even, just like I showed in the last example, instead of using that decay, you could go ahead and, let me just delete the decay. Let's add a freeze layer. And again, we're going to clear out that freeze. Let me move the spherical field over here. And let's go back to my morph. And let's just set this freeze to max, because we basically want to take the influence from the spherical field, add it on to the spherical field, set this mode to grow, and let's set this radius fairly high. And let's hit play, and let's grab our spherical field. Come on, spherical field. There we go. And all this needs to do is touch this edge, and it's then going to trigger this cloth, and like that's all I need to do. And the freeze layer is going to grow on that influence of that morph deformer and do its thing. So you can like pick a corner and inflate it from there. I can do another spherical field. I'll just command click and drag this, and let's just add this to our morph. Let's just add this to our list here and just make sure that we're adding both of those spherical fields together. So I'm just going to set this top spherical field, set it to add. So it's adding on to the other spherical field. I can move this down to this corner. Like say I want to also have it inflate from this corner at the same time. Go back to frame 0, and let's just go and clear out our freeze like that. And sometimes what you'll have to do is actually just move this out and maybe even just animate this spherical field coming in and touching the edges. So you actually so you don't have like this initial inflation going on. But if I have both of these things going, you can see that freeze layer growth is coming from both of those corners and kind of inflating. And again, that jiggle deformer is key. If we didn't have the jiggle deformer, we wouldn't have that nice springy undulation that really sells this as like looking like a cloth simulation. And again, the smoothing layers really help a lot here too. You can see without looks kind of janky, but if we add that smooth, that initial smoothing, and then that relax, really helps a lot. So triggering cloth dynamics, really, really awesome stuff. This is what it ended up looking like at the end. So just triggering that with a freeze layer, and then it just grows and spreads throughout the entire rest of our cloth. So let's go to our next one, materials and. So right now you can see I have this little dog balloon, and what I'm doing is using a linear field to not only control the gold texture coming on and revealing on, but I'm also controlling the displacement on that gold material as well. So really cool, powerful things you can do to control materials using fields. So let's just go into that. First, what I'm going to do is show you how you can use this to adjust transparency on an object. So here I have this suitcase. I want to show what's inside. Like, say I'm doing an animation, like TSA or whatever. We're searching your bag. We have this like spotlight kind of passing through, revealing what's inside. Okay. So what I'm going to do, here's my material. There's my suitcase material. And what I'm going to do is just go and grab a spherical field here. Field, spherical field. So there we go. And basically what I want to do is have this affect the material here. So what I'm going to do first is grab a vertex map. So what I'm going to do is just go to character, I'm going to go to paint, and just paint on that suitcase. So it's important that on your object you actually have like fairly subdivided object because you can see how this is looking kind of janky, a little bit, but the higher the subdivisions, the smoother your vertex map is going to be eventually. So there we go. I just clicked there. I got my vertex map here. What I'm going to do is click on this Use Fields. And you can see we have this freeze layer. I'm just going to clear that out. Actually, I think I can just delete this. I don't need it. And what I'm going to do is just grab a sphere. Oh, I already have that spherical field. Let's just get rid of that. Let's add the spherical field this way. So if I bring the spherical field in, there it is. I can move this around and check that out. I can control where this vertex map is doing its thing along the surface of my object. So what we can do now is take this vertex map to control materials or the alpha of a material. So what I'm going to do is double click on the suitcase, go into the alpha, check it on, go into my texture, and go to Effects, Vertex Map. And all I need to do now is click on this vertex map and drag and drop the vertex map into this field. And now you can see, let me just go click off the vertex map. Right now it's inverse, okay? You can actually see my pug inside the suitcase. So I'm going to go in here and just click invert. And now we have this different thing. Let me change the display mode to garage shading. And let's go to my spherical field. And let's just make this inner fall off a little bit more. And basically now you can see as I'm passing this through, I'm actually revealing the inside. If I hit render, you can actually, there's my little pug in my suitcase, and we're basically looking through our object using vertex maps and using them with alpha channels to look through materials, which is really cool. So taking this another way, let's go and go to our dog balloon here. Come on, dog balloon. So we have these two textures. We're going to do the same thing. Again, I made this dog balloon with volumes, just simple cylinders, piecing them together. It would take me a while to actually model this for real. But using volume modeling, you just piece things together, smooth it out. It's really, really awesome stuff. But if I go in here, we're going to do the same thing again, where I'm going to need to create a vertex map for this object. So again, just go into Character, Paint tool, and I'm just going to click on this. So there's my vertex map. And again, that I don't really need that little dot, but I'm just going to change this to Use Fields, delete this freeze layer. Actually, let me go and just clear this out first. Boop, and then delete. So that's going to remove that paint I did. And now what I can do, let's not get a spherical, let's get a linear field. Boom. Okay, so now you can see that spherical field's already doing it, or the linear field's already doing its thing. So you can see we got this going on. But basically what I want to do now is control the gold texture that's happening. So I'm just going to click off the vertex map. And what I'm going to do is on this initial texture that's top. So let's just go ahead and find this little pattern, little grungy thing. I'm going to go into the alpha, check that on, do the same thing, go to Effects, go to Vertex Map, and we're going to go and just drag and drop that vertex map there. So now we have the linear field controlling this, and now we can have that gold texture revealing on. Now, what if we wanted to add displacement, okay? And you can see that we have this displacement. It's affecting everything, right? It's just kind of doing all this stuff. What if we wanted this displacement to just follow that linear field? Well, we can also just drag and drop that same linear field into the falloff, and you'll see that it's actually the inverse. So what I'm going to do is go and grab the invert layer, and you can see now the linear field that's controlling the vertex map is now inverted and also applying the displacer to my the gold material. So we can have this really cool kind of material wipe, which is really awesome. We can animate this. We can also add like a jiggle deformer on here too. So as that displacement is happening, we can also have that undulating as well, just like the cloth. So really, really cool stuff. And this is something like you really couldn't do before, to easily just like wipe on materials and have these really cool dramatic transitions on your objects. Definitely don't have redshift here because it's not rendering all that fast. But let's go and let's go to our next thing, which is, there's my pug, mesh morphing. So I did a tutorial a while back that showed you how to morph splines. So what that was is I would write in cursive a spline, and then I would sweep a circle onto it, and then morph it to like a different number or a different letter or something like that. And it was a really cool way to be able to morph splines. But up until now, there's really been no way to do like mesh morphing like this until we have volumes. And volumes just unleashes this whole nother way of working. And this playback is really janky, so I'm just going to get out of that. But yeah, so it's the same concept that if you've watched my spline morphing tutorial, same kind of concept. Basically what I did is, let me just turn this off. Let me just delete this. The most important part is that you have two objects. So here's my letters right here, just one. Let me turn off these matrices. So I got a 1 and a 2, okay? And let me just hide this back again. And what I'm going to do is clone matrices onto the volume of the object. So there's the letter or the number 1. And then the volume is going to be the surface. And I just populate it until I get the form of that shape. Okay, so crank this up to, 750 or whatever. And then I have the second number, okay, number 2. And basically what I'm going to do with that is take another matrix object, clone those matrices on the second number, and same thing, volume distribution, volume mode surface, and again, do the same thing where I'm cranking up the amount of vertices so it fills out the entire volume or that form of that object, okay? So what I can do is hide this second matrix object, and what I want to do is basically morph between this matrix object to the second matrix object. So all of the matrices will change from the form and the volume shape of the 1 to the 2. So how we can do that very easily is by clicking on the initial state, which is 1. There's my matrix object, and going to MoGraph and going to inheritance. Now, inheritance effector is super, super powerful. I've done a few tutorials on it, but basically what it allows you to do is take clones or matrices from one object and transfer them and animate them to another object. So if I drag and drop I'm applying this to the first matrix object, I want to morph to the positions of the second matrix object, and one important thing you need to click on is morph motion object, and now you'll see that when I click that, we now have the form of that second matrix object. And we can control the matrices going from 1 to 2 by using the strength. Or we can go ahead, and since this is a effector, we could use a falloff if we wanted to. But I'm just going to stick with just using the strength, okay? So basically, what we need to do now is we just, right at this moment, have nothing. We got nothing here, folks, because we just have matrices, and they don't render. So to get meshes and build meshes from our matrix objects or our matrices, we're going to throw that matrix into a volume builder, okay? And one important thing to do, let me just delete this, and let's just get back to our initial state. So right now it's just set to 10. I'm going to click on this matrix object. You can actually set the radius of those matrices. We can also bring down the voxel size, which is basically the resolution of your mesh. So if you think of pixels, these are 3D pixels, voxels are 3D pixels, and now you can basically see what's happening is the volume builder is cloning like a little sphere onto each of those matrices. And right now this just looks like a brain or something weird like that, but if we want to smooth all this out, we can up the resolution and we can go ahead and add a smooth layer and get this really nice smoothed mesh, okay? And maybe, increase the radius or even shrink it down. But basically, that's the form of our little blobby mesh there. And, play around with the voxel size. And what we can then do is place this into a volume builder, okay? And I got this really shiny material on it. And then just to add that extra layer of smoothing, you'll go ahead, and let me just delete this. We'll just go ahead and add a smoothing layer. So smoothing layers are really helpful when using volume meshers, and what you're going to do is apply that smoothing layer as a child of the volume mesher, and you can see you're just smoothing out that mesh even more, okay? And one thing to note about volume builder, so you've seen a lot of people, a lot of tutorials and stuff showing you how to model things, and the default way, there's two different volume types here. One signed distance field, which is awesome for modeling, but if you want to animate or use fields with volumes, you want to use fog. And this is something that Thanasis, who does tons of amazing training on Cineversity, kind of introduced me to, and it totally made everything make sense. Fog is great. It's good for manipulating data, and what fields are doing is introducing different variations of data, okay? So basically we want to use fogs. It renders much faster, in the viewport at least. It calculates much faster when you are animating it and using fields with it than signed distance field. So that's why I'm going to use fog. You can see that it kind of changed a little bit. So with fogs, we can go into our volume mesher and use this voxel range threshold, and as we decrease this, we can actually thicken that up a little bit. Because what we're doing is we have this fog volume, and we're pushing in or out of that volume and essentially growing this volume mesh, okay? So now what we can do is go to our matrix object here, or actually the inheritance object here, and then just keyframe the strength. And let me just hide the matrix object here from the viewport. And we got this cool blobby transition here, which is really cool. So if we wanted to, we could just set a keyframe for the strength at 0, and then maybe 15 frames, go and increase this strength to 100. And then we have this transition here, which is pretty linear. So what I want to do is go ahead and add a delay to our inheritance. So let's just go ahead and add a delay. Get in here. There we go. There's our delay. We're going to set that to smooth. And what that's going to do is just smooth out the movement of those matrices from that first matrix object to the second one. Or it should, at least if I did everything correctly. Actually, yeah, let's do it. Got the inheritance. And maybe I need to add this here. What's going on? Did I keyframe everything? Got that. I got the delay. Inheritance. Delay. Smooth. What's going on? Essentially, what we should do is have this delay, and it should be affecting that, and smooth everything out. I think maybe I need to add the delay here. There we go. Okay, so what I was doing was I was adding the delay to the inheritance, and there's no movement really coming from the inheritance. It's all from the matrices, so it's not slowing anything down. So it's important to kind of know what the heck you're doing. So I shouldn't really be up here because I obviously don't know what the heck I'm doing. No, so the inheritance, what's going on is the inheritance moving things, and I wanted to smooth that out. So I was placing the delay the wrong place. So once I apply the delay effector to the inheritance, now it's going to smooth everything out. And you can even go in here, and instead of using blend, we can use spring and get this really blobby kind of springy boingy kind of thing going on, which is, really cool, energetic kind of thing. And this is, the possibilities are endless as long as you can create forms and rebuilding them. And this is, of course, best for very organic looking smooth shapes. The more complex you get, the more it's gonna, kind of be a little bit more nutty. So here's another scene file. Oh, don't you? Okay, there we go. Thought I was gonna open R19. I was like, we can't do this in R19. So here's a balloon elephant. Same kind of setup. Instead of numbers 1 and 2, we have just a mesh of our elephant. And then we have a linear field going through and revealing our little dog again as well. So I could go in here and, adjust the mesh so we get a little bit more detail. But this is just incredibly powerful that you can morph between meshes using some of the tools that have been inside of Cinema 4D for forever, matrices and the inheritance effector. So I think that's one of the most amazing things as far as, Cinema 4D R20 has been out for like 6 months now, and I feel like we're just skimming the surface of like, oh, I could use it in this workflow, or I've done this old way for years, and now we have all these new tools, and like you do want like mesh morphing, and you're like, oh man, like how can I use this now in the future? Or how can I even take this very basic concept and really push it, All right, so let's do one more. Let's do melting. Let's see. Boop, boop, boop. Nope, not that. Not that. Here we go. So this is yet another older tutorial of mine where I would kind of keyframe drips and stuff like this to Lollipop. And with volumes, it's so much easier because basically, if I just turn off the volume mesher and the volume builder here, basically all I did, these are just cylinders, right? All these capsules here. So you can art direct your drips. So if I turn this, let me just turn off all this stuff. Let's remove this group field for a second. I've got the volume builder, gonna create a volume out of this, and then we're gonna mesh it, right? And then we're gonna go in our volume builder, and basically what I have here is just all my drips in a folder. So what happens when it's kind of like adjustment layers, smooth layers and reshape layers. If you want an adjustment layer just to affect a certain amount of objects, you would just place them in a folder. So here's all of my capsules, and I can have smooth layers that affect just those drips and nothing else. And then I can have a top layer smooth and reshape layer that controls the drips and how they smooth out with the actual mesh of the lollipop. Okay, so that smoothing is a little bit too high, so let me just bring that back to 2. And now what we can kind of do is take these capsules, right, and reveal them on. So how I'm going to do that is using a linear field. So let me just go and grab a linear field here, and it's in the volume builder. Let me just go and, again, this is like a layer system just like in Photoshop or Illustrator. I'm going to drag and drop these the linear field into the drips because I only want this to affect the drips. And let's go, and one important thing is we need the surface or the creation space. Instead of being a box, we want this to take the form of the objects in our scene. So you can see that like we're kind of thickening up our linear field here, or our drops here. So now all I have to do, let's drag this underneath here, and let's change this from, instead of union, to subtract. And now you can see we're actually removing those drips as I kind of bring this across. So you can see I'm kind of revealing on those drips, which is pretty cool. And again, since I'm using fields, I should be in fog. And when you add fog, it actually works much quicker. And this is actually, cutting out my my lollipop and all that stuff, but I built this before I realized Thanasis, just told me a few months ago that I should be using fogs for this. But this still works with sign distance field as well. But basically, what if I wanted to, let me just change this to the correct direction. We want this to reveal on, up to down. So let's do negative y. Did I choose wisely? Yes, I think I did. So now as I bring this linear field down, I'm having these drips reveal on. And let's just make this mesh a little bit. If I crank up the adaptive, I'm actually removing and optimizing the mesh a little bit. And one really cool quick tip that was actually released on the official Maxon YouTube channel was like just entering a value of 1 can speed up your mesh and retain a lot of the same kind of topology, but have this a lot lighter of a dense mesh here. So you can just go ahead and just reveal this on. Now, what if you wanted to add, again, a little bit more randomness to this and add a random field, just so this isn't such a linear transition. This looks pretty fake. It looks too perfect. We need to make this more imperfect, a little bit more organic. So what we would do, again, is just go to our field and grab a random field. But what you're going to see is that there's really no way to, do an overlay. So set that random field to overlay onto the linear field inside of the volume builder here. So what you need to do is actually go and create a group field, okay, and then drag and drop the group fields into, drag and drop the fields into the group field. And now we have that full blending mode list again, and we can set the random field to overlay onto our linear field. And again, we can go and adjust the random mode to noise, increase the size, do whatever we want here, okay? And now what we can do is instead of using this linear field, we're going to use the group field to reveal this on. So there's our group field. Let's drag and drop this into our layer list here. Let's move this on up to right there. And again, I'm going to use subtract. So now what I can do is adjust this linear field. And nothing's happening. That's exactly what I had planned. No, it's not at all. So we got our overlay mode, and we got our field, we got the remapping. Let's go into our layer list. So this is where it's important to how is this affecting, how is this stack doing its thing? Because what I want to do, let's have this group field, subtract, union. Is that doing anything? Linear, I got the overlay. Nope. EJ, what'd you do? What'd you do? So we got something going on. Nothing going on there. Nothing going on there. Let's turn that off. And we got the group field. We reshape. What did I do wrong? Get the group field, set the union, set this to subtract. Oh, duh. So this is good because I've done this many, many times. So remember how I added this whole thing to this mesh, right? So what's going on is a very important thing. Very important thing. The creation space by default is a box. It's not actually recognizing the objects yet until you go to the creation space and choose objects. Oh, thank you. Yes, we did it. We did it, everybody. Yeah, we did it. We figured it out. So it's just those things are so important, and it's kind of good to crash and burn on stage because I'm sure we crash and burn in our personal freelance or work lives, and you're like, what is going on? And sometimes you just need to flick that switch, right? So that's the important thing about adding fields and having them manipulate volumes is you need to make sure you're using the creation space. And now we have that linear field with that random field. And you can see the noise is a little bit too small. So let's just crank that up. And now what we'll have to do is go ahead in the volume builder and just add that smooth and the reshape layer and just smooth everything out so everything's nice and all liquidy. And do that. So now it's a little bit more organic than what we had before, right? Cool. So that is my last thing. I think my time's almost up. But let me just throw up my little keynote-y thingy here and hit play. So I have a lot of stuff on Cineversity, and there's just tons of stuff on Cineversity about fields and volumes, and I mentioned Thanasis before. Thanasis is over here at the booth. He taught me everything I know about fields and volumes, and it's such an extremely deep and powerful new feature set that's added to R20. So definitely check out Cineversity.com. I have some tutorials on there as far as fields and volumes go. Thanasis has a ton on there, and Thanasis really gets to the underbelly of like what's going on behind the scenes. And I think it's really important to just get that basic foundational knowledge of like what's going on with fields, what's up with fields, you know? And then you can apply that to all of your projects in the future once you understand that. But again, my name's EJ Hassenfratz. You can find me on iDesign.com. School of Motion, I have a 10-week course on getting up and running in Cinema 4D. So if you're completely new, check that out. And then in the coming months or so, I'm going to have a weekly Cinema 4D series on LinkedIn Learning or lynda.com. It's going to be like 5-minute little quick tips every single week for an entire dang year. So you're going to be sick of hearing my voice, I'm sure. But thank you guys again so very much. Thanks for coming out to the show floor.